different gifts and talents, different interests and things, which is obvious because there's people that come out at 9 a.m. on a Saturday to hear talks about public policy. Not a criticism, just an observation. And my particular bent has been, I love economics and I love data and statistics. And you may think, you know, what's the value of statistics? Well, I had a friend in college who was hitchhiking, and he got picked up, and he got in the car with a guy, and he said, you know, thank you so much for picking me up, because, you know, you always run the risk that you're picking up a serial killer. And the driver said, what's the odds of two serial killers being in the same car? So this is going to be a talk about the Delaware economy, how it relates to state finances, and then what might be done. Okay, so the starting point is, you know, why are economists interested in economic growth? And these are the things that relate to the growing per capita income per person. States that have faster growing income per person have stronger, better health outcomes, longer life expectancy, better mental health outcomes. And in terms of families, they have higher rates of marriage and lower rates of divorce. In terms of violence, they have lower rates of violent crime. And in terms of education, they're more likely to be high school graduates and college graduates in states that have growing per capita income. Miscellaneous, you just see stronger business communities and a variety of other things in states that have growing per capita income. So how is Delaware doing? This is a chart that shows per capita income in Delaware ranked against other states. And as you can see, Delaware got up to a point of having the 5th highest per capita income among all the states. And since that time, there's been a slow, steady falling down relative to other states to the 21st. And you say, well, how is that irrelevant? We went through the characteristics before of states with growing per capita income, how important that is. It's a measure of wealth. You know, so something's going on in the economy that you're experiencing that kind of a decline in per capita income. This is a measure of economic freedom that's put out by the Fraser Institute in Canada, and they do economic freedom by country and also all the states in the United States. And again, you see Delaware reached a level of 10th highest state in terms of economic freedom, and now they're down to about 46 or 47th. Okay, and economic freedom for Delaware, part of the problem is the tremendous increase in taxes as a percentage of personal income. And you say, well, our tax rate isn't that bad. It's only 6.6%, the highest tax rate. However, that applies at the household income of $60,000. So if you have $60,000 or more, you're paying 6.6%. The median income in Delaware is above $60,000. So more than half of the households in Delaware are now paying that highest tax rate. We also have relatively liberal Medicaid laws and high health care costs, which shows up in the Economic Freedom Index. Now, if you take the two together, you see that they correlate. In other words, there is a relationship between economic freedom and per capita income, the economic health of a state. So it's not just an ephemeral thing to look at these different things that constitute economic freedom and ability to be innovative, ability to be entrepreneurial, and what happens in a state's economy. Now, another way of looking at the Delaware economy, these are over a business cycle. So the first 3.1% is the annual growth rate in employment in Delaware for a business cycle that went through the mid-1990s. And then from the mid-1990s through about 2004 or 5, which was another business cycle, employment in Delaware grew about 1.3%. Since the recession in 2007, 2008 to the date, employment in Delaware has grown at 0.1% a year. In other words, hardly moved, well below the national average. Another way of looking at this is output. And the kind of orange line or yellow line is the annual growth rate per quarter in output in the United States. If you step off the red carpet, you know, you get a shock. I think no, all right. I feel like I'm blocking the view for people. You can see the United States relative to Delaware. Delaware is much more volatile, and that's similar of states. States are smaller economies, there's more volatility. But what's notable about Delaware is since 2009, there's been 5 periods where we've had 2 quarters in a row or more of negative growth in output, below the national average, of course, below zero. These are called recessions by regional economists. So we've had 5 recessions in Delaware with output. The latest data on output, if you take the term of Governor Carney, current Governor Carney, from when he took office through 2019, output in the United States went up 9.4%. In Delaware, output went up -3%. In other words, it went down, you know, went negative. So you see, it raises questions about the Delaware economy. This is the Philadelphia Federal Reserve produces a leading index for every state in the United States, and they produce it monthly. And you can see going into the 2007-2008 recession that the leading index in Delaware really took a dive, was below zero, was negative. It took the state a lag of 6 months or so to realize this and react to it in terms of spending. But the notable thing is, since that time, it hasn't been negative until the last 6 months. For 6 months in a row now, the leading index for the Delaware economy, according to the Philadelphia Fed, has been negative. And so this says, you know, we're going to have a tough spring ahead of us. And the unemployment rate that Kat was talking about, the unemployment rate in Delaware has gone up 6 months in a row. It's now up to, they think it's going to be 4% by next month. And from what I can see, when I look at the components of unemployment that Kat talked about, the big driver is people losing their jobs, which would mean businesses are sensing there's a slowdown and they're starting to get rid of employees. Now, the last slide here is, you would expect the governor, the last 2 governors have said, in order to really support state finances, we have to grow the economy. Well, you've seen from the previous slides that the economy has not actually been growing. This is a chart that takes total state of Delaware general fund spending and adjusts it, divides it by population, so it's per capita, and then adjusts for inflation. And so you would think a state budget that kept pace with population growth and with inflation, you'd have a flat line up there. You can see the line goes up and down. But the notable thing is, in the last 3 or 4 years, the spending adjusted for inflation, the spending per capita has been rising. In other words, we're outspending our resources. We're outspending population growth and outspending inflation. The question is, can you keep it up? The answer is no. And we'll start paying a price for it probably at the end of this fiscal year. No state can outspend its population and inflation. Your revenue base will not allow it. So, what could be done? And the speakers have talked about all of these issues. The first thing is public education. Public education reform. The National Assessment of Education Progress Test, which all states have to give under the No Child Left Behind Act. And the test, as Kelly said, the tests are imperfect. For the last 20 years, 2/3 of the 8th graders in Delaware have tested below proficient in reading and math, 2/3. And more than 80% of the black 8th graders have tested below proficient in reading and math in Delaware. And nothing's been done. The second, and it's been a real hit on the Delaware economy, not the least of which young professionals who are in good paying jobs in Delaware with children of school age choose to live up in Chester County and Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Newcastle County experiences on an annual basis a net outmigration of $3 billion of wages that are earned in the county but go taken away to residents in other parts of the region. The second thing, which was mentioned, Dave mentioned, was electric costs. We have a carbon tax and some other policies as well. And that drives our electric rates. Delaware's electric rates, industrial electric rates, are 16% above the nation and 35% above North Carolina, which is our competitor for new manufacturing sites. And then the third thing you have is the healthcare costs. John mentioned the Certificate of Need program and that it's a barrier to entry. We have the third highest per capita healthcare spending in the nation. We have the first, we're number one in healthcare and patient spending by hospitals. And you say, how in the world is, what's driving that? Well, the Certificate of Need is a big factor. It's a barrier to entry to competition. Okay, will that change? That's the final question to address. A fellow named Manfred Olson, who was an economist, of course, wrote a book called The Logic of Collective Action. And in there, one of the questions he addressed was, why did Japan and Germany, why did their economies take off so robustly 10, 15 years after the World War II? His conclusion was World War II wiped out all the special interest groups. So when you look at these issues in Delaware, who are the special interest groups? With a case of public education, you have the Delaware State Education Association. They put money into the campaigns of state legislators, mostly Democrats, as well as the National Education Association. So you have that interest group that doesn't want to see change, even though many students are anxious for change, particularly from disadvantaged families. In the case of the electricity, Dave mentioned it a little bit, DNREC, which oversees the Renewable Portfolio Standard, DNREC gets at least $17 to $18 million a year from the carbon tax. And this is not money that comes through the general fund, it comes to DNREC and they can spend it at their discretion. And then finally, with respect to the healthcare law, up in Newcastle County at least, you have ChristianaCare approaching $3 billion a year in revenue. At least $200 million of that is net. And that's accumulated, they have accumulated over $2 billion of reserves. They just bought Union Hospital in Elkton, Maryland. They're buying up private practices in Delaware, and they love the Health Resources Board and the Certificate of Need program and maintain that as a barrier to entry. All the people on the Health Resources Board are appointed by the governor. So if ChristianaCare can convince the governor that he should maintain that system, it's a good likelihood it will. So will Delaware change? Are we going to get out of this doldrum that we're in? It's unlikely, primarily because of special interest groups. I wish I could give you better news than that, but at this point I can't. So thank you very much.